Okay, so I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar, all about preparing for the MCAT. I'm really happy that you're all here to join us. We've got really great content ready for you. Just to go over what we're going to be talking about today, first we'll be doing our introduction. So we'll be introducing our panelists. Then we'll jump into understanding the MCAT, as well as effective study tactics. Then we'll dive into creating a study plan for the MCAT, monitoring progress and adjusting your progress for the study plan, essential resources for MCAT preparation, easy test taking strategies to help boost your score, and then we'll have a Q&A session where you can ask any of our panelists questions. So if you do have a question, I'd ask that you hold on to it until we get to the Q&A section, or just type it in the chat box and then we will get to it once we get to that Q&A session. All right, so I'll just hand it over to our panelists to go ahead and introduce themselves. Guys, if you want to go ahead.
Sure. So hi, everybody. My name is Lois. I'm a third-year medical student at Harvard Med, and I went to the University of Texas at Austin for my undergrad, where I completed a biochemistry major, and I've been with Inspira for about a year and a half now, and I'm happy to be here.
How's it going, everyone? I'm Andrew. I'm between third and fourth years at Ohio State right now. Did undergrad at Pomona College in California, originally from Southern California, so I missed that weather. But I've been with Inspira for 9 months or so now. I'm excited to share this presentation we got for you guys.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. All right, let's jump into it. Understanding the MCAT.
Awesome. So the first thing about the MCAT, or the most important question, right, is what is it? So the MCAT, which stands for the Medical College Admissions Test, is a standardized exam like the SAT or PSAT, administered by the American Association of American Medical Colleges, AAMC, AAMC. It's a very important portion of applying to medical school. It's about 7.5 hours long, and it's administered through a computer. So you would go to a testing site and take the exam with a 7.5 hour duration.
All right, so there's 4 sections for the MCAT. There's the chemical and physical foundations of biological systems, ChemPhys. There's the bio section, there's a psychosocial section, and then there's a CARS section. Each of these kind of test different knowledge bases essentially that you take through your pre-med courses. So you're like OChem, your basic chemistry, those are in the ChemPhys section. Your biochem, those are in the bio section. And then psych it's not necessarily a requirement at all schools, but a lot of schools like to see having taken a psych class, that's tested there. And then CARS is kind of the just overall reading ability section. And I think that's kind of one of the trickier ones to study for when you're going through the MCAT, because it's not really knowledge based. It's more, can you read a passage, answer questions about that passage, and really understand that passage?
Mm-hmm. So effective study tactics. I'm going to first go through each of these, but there's a very organic way that all of these can kind of come into fruition. So the first portion is to identify your personal strengths and weaknesses. What I encourage students to do, because you have prerequisite courses you have to take anyways, is that I ask them to log the courses that they find that were easy for them or that they understood concepts very well. And even in those sections, make a note of the pieces or areas where you were confused. So that way you can, when it's time to sort of start studying, you kind of already have a log of what was my strength? Was it within chemistry? What was I good at? Within physics, what was I good at? And then within those, what were my weaknesses and how should I spend more time learning them and practicing them? And then the next step here is to utilize resources. So books, courses, and online tools. Which one you choose to use would be based off of what you sort of reflect on as your strengths and weaknesses. If you feel like you've been out of college for a long time and haven't taken these courses for a long time, maybe a prep course would be helpful for you. If you found that, well, actually, I can pretty much highlight the areas that I don't understand and I can review them pretty quickly and by myself, maybe a book would be helpful. And then as far as online tools, I always say that question banks are very, very helpful because they allow you to review questions quickly. The next one is to incorporate active learning techniques. And that sort of starts from day one when you're already identifying what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses. You are actively reflecting on what you know and what you don't know, or what comes easily to you and what may be a little bit harder. And then when you're reviewing questions too, you're actively thinking, what was my thought process in this section, and how did I sort of either do it like they are describing it, or how did I do it differently, and is it wrong or right? And the last is using tips for retention and recall. Everyone has a different way of retaining material. Some people use flashcards. Some people just do more questions so that they can have more opportunities to practice a certain learning framework. But always giving yourself opportunities to repeat things and recall things is going to be important for test day. So these are the 4 key portions of studies.
All right, creating a study plan. So I think the first real step is being realistic with yourself. Everyone loves to say they'll study, 12 hours, 7 days a week for 4 months or whatever, but that realistically won't be the case for a lot of people. Depending on what your schedule looks like, if you're, planning on taking the MCAT while you're still in undergrad, if you're doing a gap year job, you have to balance that with other commitments. So I like to at least give myself and give my students at least a full day off, just so they can use that as catch up, or they can just use that to take a complete break when they're prepping for the MCAT. That kind of helps with, getting yourself focused, because it's a long process, and you don't want to burn out. And I think that's a problem that a lot of students have with the MCAT, is they try and do so much at the beginning that towards the end they kind of taper off. So be realistic, and then use those time management strategies. I think setting realistic goals each day will help with that, and just having things you can check off a checklist, that you don't get so disorganized because of all the resources that Lois was talking about in the prior slides. There's so many things that you can kind of get bogged down with. So just making sure you have, what you're going to do that day, and you check those things off. And then, like I said, depending on what you're doing while you're studying for the MCAT, there's obviously going to be some other commitments that you have to have. And so just personalizing your study plan to recognize those commitments and make sure you can get everything that you need to done. That's really important.
So this is my favorite portion, which is monitoring your progress and adjusting the study plan, because we all like to think that we can do stuff for 8 to 12 hours a day. And realistically, we're not robots, right? So one of the big things that I encourage people to do is to take practice tests regularly to track your progress. Maybe for the last 2-3 weeks, you've been applying a certain technique to either study or a certain schedule. How do you know that that's working? You need to take a practice exam to see how you've changed. And I know that for the first couple of practice tests, they can always be really demoralizing, right? You have to sit down for 4 or 5 hours. It's never the full 7, but something long like that. And the first couple of practice tests that are going to be more of a reflection of your ability to run a marathon, to sit down for 5 to 7 hours versus your actual, academic ability. But once you've gotten through the habit and the motion of taking practice tests, they become more reflective of your actual content knowledge. So whenever you're organizing your schedule to study, you should always have practice tests at some intermediary point to check, is what I'm doing working? And if not, how can I change it? And then the next point here says to pay attention to your scores and how you're improving over time. As I said, the first couple of practice exams are not a reflection of your intellect. It's just, can you run that marathon and sit down for a couple hours? And then as you keep doing them, you get more comfortable with it. And then you could start using those test scores as real metrics of, am I achieving what I need to achieve? And then when you review those practice exams, which is always also important, you can kind of identify the areas that you need to spend more time on.
Yep. So exactly like Lois was saying, reviewing those practice tests will let you know kind of your areas where you need to improve. And that's why these practice tests are so great, is because they give you objective information as to what you know and what you don't know. Because if you're not able to answer it on a practice test correctly, likely you just don't know that topic very well. So if you're missing, let's say, a bunch of OChem questions, adjusting your study plan to really focus on hitting those OChem UWorld questions, or reviewing a Kaplan book with OChem content. That's really important, and those practice tests are going to let you know what areas that you can, what areas you need to improve on to get the score you want.
And then the next portion is to make adjustments to your study plan as needed. It's not made in stone. It's very flexible. And as you learn more about yourself, your ability to sit down and study, or to go through this marathon, you make adjustments. And when you realize certain areas are still, not as great as you would like them to be, you make adjustments that way too. And so as it says here, that might mean that you spend more time on certain subjects. If you do that and you maybe do like a 1 or 2 week iteration, and you find out that like, I spent more hours on this, but I didn't make any improvements, maybe time may not actually be the thing that you need, and you might need someone to assist you instead, and you might need to review the questions more carefully, or to go through the thought process of the examiners. And it's really hard, because I know that a lot of students have been very successful in college with their way of studying and their way of working. And sometimes that doesn't help. It doesn't actually translate well on the MCAT. And so like 80% of the progress sometimes it's just your willingness to be flexible and adapt to either what your results are saying that you need to do, or what someone else's recommendation may be for you. You might have to do something differently. I know for me, it was so hard for me to just do UWorld questions. I was like, no, I have to go by the book. I have to like do chapter by chapter by chapter, but that's not how the MCAT is set up. I have to start learning how to go through UWorld questions to review quickly and efficiently. And that took a minute, but once I got into it, it was like light and day. So this is a big change. It sounds small, but it's actually a big portion of MCAT studying.
Definitely. And then don't be afraid to ask for help. I think this is a super important point as well. I think everybody goes through a little bit of trouble, at least when they're starting their MCAT prep. I know I was kind of just like, I had a part-time job or 2 part-time jobs while I was studying for it. And it was just like, I have to do all these questions, had to, work on top of that, do all this content review. And so, it makes it a lot, it can be very stressful. And so we've all been through it. Medical students have all been through it. If you have people who have gone through MCAT prep already and done well, absolutely feel free to reach out to them. Or, if you want to use Inspira for that help as well, we're here to help tutor for the MCAT. We have some great tutors. And remember that it's okay to ask for help. And I think that's another important point. It's not a sign of weakness at all to ask for help, especially during this. It's a very different test than your typical college tests. And so, everybody struggles with it at some point, and asking for help can actually help you a lot in the end game. And it's definitely not like a sign of weakness at all. It's something to make you get the score and get the result that you want.
So resources. Okay. So there are certain groups of literature or resources that you can use. You have some example here, the Princeton Review, Kaplan. I think what I like to do is to go find used ones and see, one, if this resource might be something that's helpful for me before I spend money and I pay for it. But sometimes the tests don't actually change, the details don't change too much. So you can also just buy like used material. But these review books are helpful because they essentially summarize all the content for the test in like a very accessible material. I think Princeton goes into more detail than Kaplan. So again, depending on where you feel like your strengths and weaknesses are and what you want to know and how much time you have, you can decide on the resources that you want to use. And then what I like about them too is that they often provide detailed explanations and practice questions. And so say that you have a lot more time than I can't think of like a framework right now, but say you have a lot of time and you want to access more practice questions, the Princeton Review and the Kaplan books also have practice questions that come along with them to ensure that you understand like that chapter. So say you've skimmed through or read through that chapter, at the very end of that chapter, they have questions. And if you're getting those questions right, you know that you're on the ball and you're ready to go. And if not, you might have to review those sections again. And the books are also very helpful because they have tips for effective study strategies and tips for remembering certain concepts well. That's kind of hard because sometimes I know we all just sort of like, I've read this 10 times, but I keep forgetting it. The books can give you like little mnemonics or little phrases to remember the things that you forget easily.
And then there's online courses. And then, as we mentioned a couple times, the practice tests. The online courses, definitely, if you are somebody who needs a little more structure, those can be great, and they can guide you. You know, you're going to learn this on this day, this on the next day, and that just helps not having to plan necessarily what you're going to learn on your own if you choose to do a book version of the content review. And then the practice tests, we've already mentioned and stressed how important they are. But those are the ones that will give you a real idea of what you know and don't know, and an idea of how you're performing as well. There's a couple of them listed on the right here. There's like these online Kaplan practice tests. I know Next Step does one as well. And then there's 2 courses listed on the right there as well. But, you know, just make sure when you're taking these practice tests, make sure that they're reputable and people have done them and thought they simulated the exam well. And also when you're taking them, try and simulate the actual exam experience. So sit down, you know, unbothered in a closed corner somewhere, and try to treat it like test day, like game day, and make sure you don't have any distractions or anything, because you want a real idea of how you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the next one goes through flashcards and question banks. My favorite UWorld is on here. And then because AAMC is the one that administers the test, I think AAMC practice questions and section banks are like important to use and to practice with because they're the actual examiners. So they talks about flashcards, which help you review content and review key concepts that you might easily forget. Like I have had to relearn the Krebs cycle 10,000 times, but if you're going through it, maybe reviewing it once every day, it's a little bit easier to retain. And then question banks gave you practice questions that allow you to go through the logical thought process that you would or wouldn't go through. And I actually think, yes, the question banks themselves are very helpful, but I find it's the review of those question banks that are the most tangible, because you can get questions right and have a flawed thought process. So whenever you're reviewing and you're reviewing what the explanations for the questions are, you want to make sure that it's pretty concordant with your own. And then again, it helps using these regularly is actually the key. You can't just use it for 1 week and then toss it away. You have to be using it practically and regularly. And again, we've listed a bunch of tools here, but it's less is more. So maybe pick 1 or 2 and then think about how you learn and what works for you. You do that practice exam, you see if it's working and you're seeing those numbers. And if not, what can I change? What can I improve? What can I do? And maybe you end up utilizing UWorld, or you end up utilizing some flashcard deck instead to help you retain information.
Yeah, it's definitely better to do 1 or 2 things all the way through than to do 25% of 10 of them. Yeah, exactly. So that helps with step prep when you get into med school too as well. So supplemental materials and resources, these are the kind of things that can just aid you in your content review. And there are a bunch of them out there. Khan Academy was one that I used when I was doing my own MCAT prep, and it's one that I recommend. They have great videos, great explanations for things. We also have a couple of different resources, MCAT practice questions, pop quizzes, cheat sheets, and prep videos that are all made for you guys to help with your MCAT studying. But you know, if you have a tutor or somebody that has gone through the process before, just make sure to reach out to them and see what they used, see what they liked and didn't like, and give those a try, just so you have some inside info when you're starting your MCAT prep. And then, like we said, choose a couple and go through them fully. Don't choose a bunch and then only do a little bit of them. That's definitely the best strategy to go about these tests.
Awesome. Now for some easy test taking strategies to help boost your score. So approaching passage-based questions, yes, it's very important to read the questions carefully to really understand the main idea and key details. If they provide any visuals, be sure to look at them. Don't avoid those. If they're there, they're important. And then you can take notes or underline key points. I think for the taking notes and underlying key points, you want to do it in an efficient way. If you find that highlighting things or underlining things is taking more time, then maybe you do less of that. But it is very important to read the passage carefully and understand what they're asking. Secondly, you want to think about managing your time efficiently during the exam. You want to pace yourself. Learning how to pace yourself is another part of the entire MCAT preparation journey. And the more practice exams you take, you get to learn, when is it that I get fatigued? When is it that I need to pee? When is it that I need to take a break? And when you learn those things, you'll be able to emulate them and practice them and simulate them in future practice tests and hone the most efficient use of your 7.5 hours. If you get stuck on a question, don't dwell on it for too long, move on. You just guess, pick one. If you have extra time at the end, you can come back, but if not, you can just move on. And then use the clock timer to be able to track your progress and to track your timing. I like to just know, like, by question 25, I usually have X amount of time left. So if that's helpful for me, and then I can gauge if I've stayed on a question for too long and I'm not usually at that same time frame, I know I need to speed it up a little bit. For effectively answering multiple choice questions, you always want to read the questions carefully. Again, identify the key phrases and then what is the question asking you? Because you can know the answer to that thing, but it might be asking you a very different or opposite or what it's not. So be sure to remember what is it asking you. And then the MCAT's also pretty good about giving you like obviously wrong answers, like especially first in the sequence. So don't always think that A is wrong, but when you're reading through the questions, you can just easily eliminate or cross out the wrong answers, and it allows you to sort of clear your thinking and start comparing the last two that you have to compare. And then again, if you're unsure about an answer, just make an educated guess, right? Because you can still get that point based off of a guess. And then lastly, just take deep breaths, try to stay calm. Remind yourself that it's normal to feel nervous and you're prepared, you've been practicing, and then use positive self-talk. You never underestimate how much positivity can actually impact your test. When you feel good and you're trying to guess answers, you might be doing some good stuff. Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much, guys. So we've reached the Q&A section of our webinar. So if you guys have any questions about any of the content or information that was just discussed, feel free to leave some questions in the chat box. We've got one already from Colby. Okay, I have two questions. First, would it be wise to start with just 1 hour a day reading the textbook, answering 10 questions from that field, taking 1 day off as a break per week, then I start to get more comfortable with MCAT studying, increase the time and question load?
I think any approach is good. It depends on how much time you have before your test day. I think if you have like a 1 month, 2 month, I might encourage a more aggressive approach. But if you have like 12 months, 8 to 12 months, that's like sounds like a nice like study, when's like the study and, slow is good.
Okay, Colby's second question. My test is in 6 months in September, and I plan to study roughly 18 hours a week, 3 hours a day average, within a month out from the test date. Is that too much for the typical student?
So I would say 3 hours a day, 6 within a month out. So if you're within a month out, I would start studying a little bit earlier, I would say, probably 2 or 3 months out. I think 3 hours a day. And I'm guessing if you're saying you're a typical student, if you're still an undergrad, I think that's reasonable. Obviously, there's going to be days where maybe you don't get as much studying in, and just make sure that you have like a day that you can pencil in to kind of make up for things that you didn't get to, or things that you can do to get ahead even. But I think that's reasonable. I'd say 3 hours a day seems fairly typical. And then obviously those practice test days are going to be a little bit longer because those are, I think 4 or 5 hours. And just make sure you have those practice tests penciled out on a schedule when you want to take them within that like last 2 months or so before your test date. But it sounds reasonable, I would say.
Yeah. And don't hesitate to vamp it up if you find that your practice tests are not concordant with the results that you want. If there's a bigger gap than what you need, you can always be more aggressive with that.
Yep.
Do you guys mind sharing how long you guys studied your MCAT? Like, was it 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months?
Yeah, mine was, so I took it in the summer, going into my senior year of college. So I ended up taking a gap year after college, and I think mine was 2.5 months or so. And then I kind of ramped it up. It started off a little slower, and then I started doing kind of like a practice test or so every week. And I thought that schedule worked well. And then just kind of studying off that practice test, as well as like other question banks and things that I used.
Yeah. And I prepared for mine. I think I took it during like the summer before my junior year. So I was like a sophomore, like a child. Oh my gosh. And what I had done was I had organized my schedule so that all of the prerequisites were done my freshman and sophomore year. So I kind of used my classes as studying. And then I started taking my practice tests actually before my summer started, because the summer was about like a month or 2 months. And then I did like dedicated studying for those 2 months. And I took it like right in the first week of school starting. It was like chaotic, but similar. It's like same framework. I was just doing kind of light studying with school. And then I just used the 2 months of summer to like be very aggressive with my prep.
Nice. Okay, so we've got a couple more questions that have come in. Question from Musruba. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I'm an international student. I'm not that good in English. How can I prepare for the MCAT?
Yeah, it's a little tougher, especially with the cars section, because that is in English, and it is basically like a reading comprehension section of the exam. Just reading as many passages like that as you can, I think, would be the most beneficial. I think you'll find that the science side probably isn't too difficult to cross over into English, but the cars section is probably something that you'll struggle with the most if with English. So just try and like read as many passages as you can. I know when I was studying, there was like this free newsletter that gave out, I think it was the Jack Weston newsletter, actually. They gave out like 4 passages a week, and I tried to answer those. And then just look online for as many of those English cars passages that you can find, and try and use those.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Question from Christine. Are the Khan Academy videos enough?
Oh, they are so helpful. I loved Saul and his group. They're not enough, but they are helpful if you have content gaps. And that kind of goes with, again, like if you go through like a Kaplan book and you realize that, okay, these are certain areas that I just don't get, and you find that reading a textbook is not helpful for you, as for me, I would find the content title or the objective in the book, and then I would go on Khan Academy and find someone to like explain it on there. But I still had to do UWorld questions. I still had to take practice exams. So it's another tool. And if you find that it's helpful for you to have someone sort of lecture through a video, it's a great tool if that helps. But otherwise, it's just another tool.
Cool, thanks. Okay, question from Kayla. Thank you guys for this helpful webinar. I think I'm struggling most with starting the process out of fear, but also how do you guys pick out which books work best for you? I see so many different reviews and it's hard to kind of base what type of books to get, like Kaplan or Princeton versus the TBR books or something else.
Yeah, that's a common question. And I think really like the honest answer is none of these books are, if you choose one, none of them are going to lead you astray. Realistically, they all have kind of the same content. My advice would just be to ask anybody who you know has taken the MCAT. I can give you myself for an example. I use the Kaplan books. I like them. I thought they were helpful and good enough content review. So I would recommend those. But, the Princeton Review ones I've also heard good things from. So if you know anybody who you share like a similar learning style with, you could ask them for advice and see what they thought about their books. But realistically, like the book that you choose, it's going to have pretty much the same content. So just feel comfortable choosing one and writing with that one.
Yeah. I get really bogged down in details sometimes. So I would have loved to read the Princeton review, but I knew that like if I got it, I would just be burying myself in that content. So I think I intentionally picked the Kaplan because it was like pretty short. And I didn't want to spend too much time reviewing stuff that I'd already taken classes for. But yeah, I think if you can find someone who has a similar learning style, or if someone has used books that you can use, that's how I would go. And then it kind of depends, like, what are you trying to use the books for? Are you trying to use the books as a reference tool just to like find the answer to a question that you have? I think anyone goes. If you're trying to learn from scratch and you haven't like touched any of the content, I might actually like suggest the Princeton one a bit more, just because it goes into a bit more detail. Kaplan's like really short and sweet. So if you've taken all those courses and you're like, I just need to skim this and like know it really quickly, I think Kaplan's a great resource too.
Okay. Question from Joseph. How many times can I be allowed to repeat the test if I miss to get what is required?
It's an interesting question. You can take it. I think it's like 7 or 10 times in your lifetime. There's like a limit, right?
Yeah, it's pretty high. It is pretty high. So
it's pretty high. I wouldn't go and take it 7 to 10 times. I think I would be intentional in the beginning to look at what score do I want. And if you don't know what score you want, go look at which schools do I want to apply to and do I want to get into. They have a score median that you can find, and then aim for that score. And then if you're taking practice tests, actually, here's my recommendations. If you're taking practice tests and you're not getting that score, I may defer the exam. But say that something happened, you took the test, you didn't get the score that you wanted, and you're going to take at least like 6 months to restudy and be very intentional about getting a new score, like a really different, better score, then I would say take it twice and then you're done. I've had people take it, I think 3 times max, but it was like a freak accident the first time. The second time they just were not comfortable and they were scared. And then the third time they just like got everything clicked. But more than 3, I don't think I've had someone do more than 3.
Yeah. I also think 3 is kind of the upper limit. I think I've heard one person take 4 and still do well. But I think the other thing to take into account is like the time between you take those exams. So it's not like I'm taking an exam, a month later I take another one, a month later I take another one. It's the people that I've known who have taken like 3 or 4, take 1, don't do well, take 2 months, take it again, don't do well again, and then they take maybe like a full year basically to like really like study or like improve their app in a different way. And then they retake it and do a lot better. So.
Okay, question from Christine. How can I improve in cars?
Yeah, cars is the most difficult section, I think, to improve in. I think there are like a lot of good videos. I think we have a couple that are just like on cars prep in general and just like how to approach a cars passage, how to approach the questions that are coming from it. So find like a technique that you want to use when you're reading through a cars passage, whether it's just like jot down a quick summary about the paragraph or whatever you want to use, and just like do as many questions with that technique, see if it works. If it doesn't work, try and figure out something else that'll work for you. But just doing as many of those reading comprehension questions is going to be your best bet for improving in cars. It's just difficult because it's not like a real like a knowledge gap where you can just fill in knowledge. So just improving, getting as many questions done as you can, I think.
Okay, question from Ms. Reba. I want to buy an MCAT book. Should I order on Amazon? And also, which book is the best?
I would first. So Kaplan has this. I don't know. I'm like, they're not paying me. I don't know why I keep advertising them. They have this like reduced income thing where like if you qualify, they'll actually send you free books. And I think the requirements that you have to like also apply. They give you like credits to also apply the medical something like, I don't know, somebody's doing it. No, I think it's the AAMC is doing it. And then you get the books and then you have to apply with the credits within that year. But I think you can look into that AAMC like free Kaplan books. I don't know if they're still doing it, but they were doing it when I was applying. But other than that, there is no best book. I personally feel like there's no need to buy a new set because it's usually the same content each year. If you can find used books or a friend of yours can give you used books, I would just take a used books, but you can buy them on Amazon too. They're pretty I think they're reasonably priced.
Yeah, I know like people off Reddit like sometimes sell their books and stuff like that. So that's like another option for getting used books if you're interested. But definitely I would go the used route instead of purchasing new.
Same, yeah.
Okay, so much. Okay, question from Kayla. Would you also recommend starting out with a diagnostic test to see what you can focus more on rather than just going into straight content review?
I love a diagnostic test, but it depends on the personality of the student that I'm working with. I love a diagnostic test because one, you sit through that and you're like, whoa. But now at least you're taking it seriously. You know that there is a hill to climb, there's work to be done, and you're motivated. There's some students who do that and they are demotivated. And so if I can tell that that's going to happen, I say, don't touch the diagnostic. Let's just leave it. So I like it because I just think it's a great way to see what base knowledge you have and for you to experience a test. Like if you haven't run the race, you won't know how hard it is until it's time to run it. But if you're easily demoralized or you already know you have a big content gap, you haven't been in a classroom in a long time, you haven't reviewed any content in a long time, don't bother with it. But I personally like them a lot.
Yeah, definitely exactly what she said. Like if you're a person who will see a poor score on a diagnostic and just go into a hole, probably not the best idea. But I'm a big fan of diagnostic tests as well. So I think it's a good strategy to see like what areas you are weak in. But just remember, it's a diagnostic test. The score doesn't really matter for the diagnostic test. It's more as like identifying your weaknesses. So
awesome. Thanks so much, guys. I think that's the end of our questions. I don't think we have any more. So thank you so much, Lois and Andrew, for all your insightful information. Really awesome webinar today. And thank you, everybody, for joining. If you missed it in the web chat, we will be sending out this webinar to all of attendees afterwards. So if you want to go back and review, you can. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great night. Take care.
Thanks, guys.